Good morning, good afternoon, rather. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Zimbabwe Daily. My name is Yvonne Muchaka, and I do hope I find all of you well. Today, we are bringing you Behind the Microphone, a program where we look at the stories making the headlines in greater details. And today on the program, I have with me the president of the Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, Mr. Masaraure. Welcome to Zimbabwe Daily, sir.
Thank you, Yvonne, for having me.
Awesome. Just a few days ago, we saw the results of the grade 7 coming through, and I think there has been the results have been quite telling. We see that rural schools remain short-handed and poorly resourced, as well as we see that there is a huge gap in terms of what the students are getting, and this is often reflected in public examinations results, which we have gotten. And so I've invited Mr. President so that he'll be able to give us a proper assessment of what really transpired in our rural schools, most especially in the Matebeleland region, where we saw most of the bottom 10 schools coming from. Mr. Masaraure, please talk to us. What happened?
Okay, thank you so much, Yvonne. I think to begin with, it was let's assess the context under which the examinations were written. It was highly irresponsible on the part of government to impose examinations on unprepared learners. It is a fact that these learners lost over 6 months of formal learning time. And when schools were closed physically, raw schools had no capacity to move on to remote learning because the facilities are simply not there in the rural communities. And the Zimbabwe itself does not even have a policy on remote learning. So at the end of the day, these learners, after spending over 6 months at home, doing nothing, being idle, they were rushed into an exam room against our advice. We had advised that the exams be postponed to sometimes around March, April, or at least we try to bridge the gap of access of education which had been ensured then, but the government was adamant. Secondly, the Zimbabwe Schools Examination Council itself was not ready for the examinations. The exams were run chaotically, and we suspect some of the chaos contributed to the poor pass rates that we have witnessed. But these are the new realities in the face of COVID-19. But traditionally, our rural schools have been suffering from neglect over the years of underfunding. The government has not been taking care of our schools. So you realize that we have dilapidated infrastructure in these rural schools, and we have inadequate infrastructure. Some learners learning under trees, some learning in makeshift structures. Now, we know that the government has a capacity to bridge the infrastructure deficits in our schools, but they're simply not interested. As a union, we have advocated for the introduction of an education equalization fund, which we believe can go a long way to try to bridge the infrastructure deficits in our rural schools. Such a fund would help us construct libraries, laboratories, get internet connectivity, electricity in our rural schools, the things that are not available at the moment. So our government has ignored this call, but this is not a call from ARTUZ only. It is part of the recommendations of the Nziramasanga Commission report of 2000, where Dr. Nziramasanga and his team recommended that the government should set up this particular fund to bridge the gap between rural and urban schools, should come up with a substantive or substantial rural attraction and retention allowance for teachers. We want to attract the best teachers to our rural schools. We want to retain them for the hardships they ensure visit these remote schools, they are paid a handsome bush allowance for visiting the bush, where ordinarily some of these teachers have become residents in what they call a bush. They've become workers in that particular bush. So we are simply saying government should give at least 75% of basic salary as a rural retention and attraction allowance, so that we have the base of our teachers in these schools. If you visit this education district offices across the country in rural provinces, you will see teachers queuing, waiting for their opportunity to be transferred to a better school in an urban area. So these teachers are not committed to those particular communities. It is the responsibility of our government to incentivize teachers to be willing to be in those particular environments. But we have no other option but also to first escalate the provision of ICT, access to ICT in our schools. We cannot run away from that. And we propose that it is high time the government considers setting up what we call community networks. We have a case study that we have been following in Buera recently, where the whole community managed to come up with their own community Wi-Fi, obviously, which is now helping them to get everyone connected, paying very little to the service providers. We hope that our government can be able to move in and at zone level set up a community network where schools around that particular zone can be able to come together for research, for using that facility, and even the teachers themselves to develop their capacities as we move on to provide quality education for our rural schools.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that quick environmental scan. This is Zimbabwe Daily, and we are on Behind the Microphone, where we are looking at the grade 7 results. So the results are out, and 9 of the top 10 ranked schools are in Harare. Bulawayo does not have a school in the top 40. The 10 worst schools with zero pass rate are in Matebeleland, and 88 schools countrywide recorded a 0% pass rate. Aspindale Park School tops the ranking with a 100% pass rate. Now, we are talking to ARTUZ President Obert Masaraure just to have an analysis of what really is causing these challenges in our rural areas. And he highlights quite a number of issues: the failure to have remote learning during COVID-19. As you know, schools were abruptly closed and those in the rural areas were not spared. He also notes that ZIMSEC itself was not ready, and the process for distribution of papers was chaotic, and teachers are not willing to spend their times in the rural areas, especially given the kind of remuneration that they're getting. Now, we saw Mr. Masaroli, we saw Mr. George Charamba saying that the teachers are to blame. The teachers are responsible for the dismal performance by grade 7 students in some schools across the country. And because you've been politicking with children's lives, demanding for salaries and actually not teaching them. What did you have to say about that?
I think George Jaramba is misguided. These statements were not guided by any scientific findings. It was just a random shot from someone who is so desperate to be heard. We can't really blame the teachers, the underpaid teachers who are getting slave wages, underpaid teachers who are starving while they are working. Now, if we are going to be discussing the issue of the labor relations between the teachers and their employer, who happens to be government, the challenges are structural, and we are pushing for reforms, structural reforms, in the way the government engage the employees, because that is the major challenge we have. If you go to other sectors, you will see workers working but being underpaid, but they at least negotiate with the employer sincerely, go through a process of collective bargaining and come up with a collective bargaining agreement. Whoever wins during the process of engagement carry the day. So even if you are underpaid, but there's an agreement there, a collective bargaining agreement, which you signed as the workers, you have to go back to work and wait for another day. In our context, it's so different. Our constitution, Section 65, provides for the right to engage in collective bargaining, but that is not provided by the ancillary laws, particularly the Public Service Act, Statutory Instrument 141 of 1997. The government still have powers to fix our salaries without engaging us in proper collective bargaining. So this is the challenge. So the government will invite some people who gather under the illegal board called the Apex Council. Then they will advise that particular grouping that we have fixed your salaries at this particular level. Go and tell your members. That is not how people engage at labor. The workers' side should be heard, and then proper negotiations should be done according to the constitution. But our auxiliary laws still provide our government with the powers to fix salaries without going through that process. So that is the crisis, and we urge the government to urgently reform our labor laws so that they are in sync with the national constitution. If we deal with that particular challenge, then you will see things becoming better in our sector. You will see the teacher unions coming together to engage our employer genuinely, independently. Unfortunately, the government is stopping that process, and at the end of the day, our education is suffering. The statement from Mr. Charamba should be disregarded. We know government robbed us of our salaries. We used it to earn United States $520 as minimum for our teachers. But now through some currency reforms, which were perfectly designed to slash the wages of the working class by Mutuli Ngube, we have lost our salaries. So on average, last year, a teacher was now earning around 35 to 40 US dollars. Which was unacceptable, and this is why teachers declared that they were incapacitated. At no particular point in time, the teachers said we no longer want to work for our public. Teachers were ready to work, but they wanted to be capacitated so that they would deliver the services. But the issues that we have that is with regard to the labor. But why kids failed, you see that these pass rates have been falling over some time. In 2019, we raised the red flag. When the pass rate, grade 7 results, the pass rate dropped by 5%. Then now it has dropped by 9%. But why are the pass rates dropping? It's because the sector is now an orphaned sector. We are not funding. At a time where the sub-Saharan average budgetary allocation for education is over 16%. Zimbabwe is consistently allocating less than 13% towards our education. At a time when the Dakar Declaration on Education, to which Zimbabwe is part true, nations agreed that they would commit 20% as threshold to fund education. We still continue to fund less than 13 of our budgetary allocation towards education. This is at a time again where over 80% of that particular amount goes to wages. So there's nothing left for infrastructure development. There's nothing left for capital investments. This is at a time where Zimbabwe has a shortage of almost 3,000 schools. So the situation, the crisis has been brewing over for some time. And in 2020, in September 2020, we warned the government, we produced a report, the Education in Crisis report, which we published in September 2020. We captured in detail the crisis in the education sector, the long-term structural challenges and the short-term challenges. And we made solid recommendations. We hope government will one day choose to read and some recommendations which come from us and other experts around the country who are always trying to give advice to our government. Unfortunately, the government doesn't seem to take advice. They want to celebrate the budgetary surplus when they are not funding social services, but they still want to reap where they never sowed.
Right, they want to reap where they never sowed, and indeed the grade 7 results and the falling in those result outcomes is really something that is worrisome. Now, in terms of rural areas and rural teachers, I know you have made a number of recommendations, including communities coming up with community networks in order to facilitate for the ICT development in these areas. But what are the means does government need? I know you've raised the issue that the education sector has become an orphan, and that you have raised these recommendations in the Education in Crisis platform, maybe for the benefit of parents who are also watching on and policymakers, and also those who can come on board to facilitate and help our education sector, especially in the rural areas. What needs to be done?
Yvonne, I had lost you there. I think I had an interruption with my connection. What was your question again? Sorry.
It's okay. I was saying, what should be done? We may not have, we may have some parents who are on the show, some policymakers, some organizations who may actually want to come on board and say, how can we make our education sector in Zimbabwe work? Now, I was saying, what are some of those recommendations that you raise in the Education in Crisis report that you did in 2020?
Thank you so much. So as Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union, we have come up with a blueprint for our education sector, which we call ADAPT. So the A on ADAPT speaks to the issue of adequate funding, which is an issue that I spoke to earlier on, where we should
Right.
channel adequate resources towards the sector. Then the D speaks to the issue of devolution and democratization of education management. So under devolution and democratization of education management, we are saying we have to do away with the sick culture where all planning and management of our education is done by a group of people in Harare, the permanent secretary and the minister and their team. We are not involving the communities in making decisions for the education of their own children. We only involve them to pay fees. And you will be shocked that the parents in Zimbabwe are paying the most substantial contribution towards education. At times, they are even paying more than the government itself. But they are not involved in managing education. They are not involved in planning. A devolved structure will allow different communities to also contribute what they think is more important for the learning curriculum. Of course, we have a national template, but we have diverse needs of education in different communities. Our education needs are variegated across the country. So let's allow the communities to also input in the curriculum, having their own issues getting in there, but then also let's allow them to manage education, making decisions, fundraising at community level for their own education, and then also making decision on how these resources are going to be spent at a more community level. And our proposal is to have a decentralized system where district education is officers or district schools inspectors are actually elected by the people. This is the kind of the side of the democratization process. We elect the best education experts in your districts and let them lead the planning of education in that particular district. Of course, sharing notes with the national leadership. We also don't want to see the stinking culture of the ZANU-PF ruling party invading our schools, making them unsafe for teachers and our learners. So this is the D, democratize and devolve our education sector. Then the other A speaks to the issue of addressing the curriculum deficits in the sector and also enhancing teacher capacity. Our teachers are not even ready to deliver remote learning. Our teachers do not have space for continuous development, because if you choose to study after being employed by the government of Zimbabwe, you will not get a salary. You are punished for wanting to advance yourself. But we know that the teachers should be they should keep on developing, they should keep on advancing, because they should be the most advanced sector, so that they give quality education to our learners. So we want that space of continuous education for our teachers to be more created, and the government should be more facilitating other than curtailing opportunities for continuous development for teachers. So we also have the P, which speaks to the promotion of labor justice within the sector. We want to see motivated teachers working tirelessly, even when there's no infrastructure, when there's no computer, but we have motivated teachers. We know a teacher can do some miracle of sort to get some things happening whilst we are working on the other issues. But we can only get there if you get to labor justice for the workers in the education sector. We have produced again another document which we call the Labor Justice Index for the teaching profession, where we really outline the structural challenges within that particular sector, the issues of collective bargaining, which I spoke to, among other issues, which impede the full commitment of the teachers to the profession. So this is an area we believe should be addressed. Then the T now speaks to the issue of technological and infrastructure development, which again the area where we would need an education equalization fund, an area again where we would need communities also to harness whatever resources they have towards developing our infrastructure, towards enhancing the technological infrastructure in our schools and the government. So this is the adaptive blueprint which we are putting out there. But as we speak right now, these are this is now when we want to address the crisis at a higher level. But there are smaller things that can be done at the moment in this context of COVID-19, like just doing the basics, ensuring that we have vaccinated our teachers, we've provided for personal protective equipment for our teachers. We've ensured that our schools teachers are well paid so that they don't declare incapacitation. Then we quickly open our schools. We know that in learners in Zimbabwe, I think we've only lost one kid to COVID-19. Our children are safe. Really, the statistics point to that. But we still have to attend to the safety of the teachers and the parents themselves, where they will go back after learning. So we just have to introduce those measures and open the schools, and then
All right, we seem to have lost Mr. Masaroli there. Our network is a bit of a challenge where he is. I will keep trying to connect with him as well. Right. So on that report, you'd realize that Zindale School in Gwanda, Kuduvale in Gwanda, Saint Teresa is in Siza, River Block, Gwanda.
Yvonne, are you still there?
Yes, Mr. Masaraure, thank you so much for coming back. I think we had lost you there. You were speaking about opening up of schools in this COVID era. There was, I think there have been concerns around opening schools whilst we have not contained COVID-19. And here, on the other hand, you are saying we must open our schools. How is that? How is government
Sorry,
supposed to?
unfortunately, I can't hear you. I can't hear you right now.
Right. Can you hear me, Mr. Masarore? Can you hear me now? Mr. President, can you hear me now? All right, so it seems we are unable to get to Mr. Masaraure. We just hope that he'll be able to reconnect. But like I was saying, we are looking at the schools in the different regions. We're looking at Gwanda, Insiza, Ulilima, Matobo, Chegutu, Sanyati, Makonde, Jimba, Kariba, Hurungwe, Makonde. They're all reporting a 0% pass rate. And you'd also realize that even the number of candidates that sat for exams is actually very low. You know, if you look at Mukamba Primary School, let me just try to put that onto the screen as well. Hopefully you can see that. So if you're looking at Makamba Primary School in Makonde, there were 21 candidates and a 0% pass rate. We also see the same happening in Makonde with 35 students sat and a 0% pass rate. In Hurungwe, we had 24 students at Muraba Primary School and a 0% pass rate. At Nebiri, were 12 candidates. If you go to Sanyati at St. Jodokas, we had 4 candidates. I have the same with St. Kizito Makaure in Chegutu with 5 candidates. So you would realize that even the number of students who are able to actually sit for exam in some of these rural areas is actually very limited, which is another area that I feel needs to be looked at seriously. We're coming to you live on Zimbabwe Daily. If you've got any contributions that you'd want to make on the platform, please do feel free to send in your message. We can see them and we can read them right here. We are talking about the grade 7 results. We saw a lot of parents overjoyed when their kids came up with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 points. We also saw a very sad picture being portrayed in our rural areas. So we'd invited the president of the Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, Mr. Obert Masaraure, just to give us a highlight on what really transpired. And I think there are a number of structural issues that need to be addressed before we can actually get to a point where our rural schools can produce results that are more pleasing, not just to the eye, but to the society. He raised what they call possible solutions to the challenges in the education sector through their document ADAPT, which speaks to adequate funding of the education sector, especially in the rural areas, devolution and democratization of education management, addressing curriculum deficits, promotion of labor justice, and technological advances in the rural schools, as we notice and as we know that our rural schools are lagging behind, and there is need for the address for curricular deficits, as we have been told that if a teacher wants to go and advance themselves at schools, there will not be a salary for them. So that is another issue that really needs to be addressed, because there is need to create that room and space for continuous development of our teachers if we are to get the kind of results that we need. He spoke about rural incentive, what is happening to the teachers who are working in the rural areas. And he spoke about the pressures at the district offices as more and more teachers seek relocation to the cities. All right, so Mr. Masaraure is trying to reconnect. Unfortunately, I think his network is playing up on him. Right. Mr. Masaraure, welcome back. Can you hear me now? Mr. Masaraure, can you hear me now? All right. So we're not quite able to reconnect with him. So I think what needed to be said has been said. There is need for a comprehensive look at the demands of the teachers, but also to look at what government should be doing in order to make sure and facilitate a good environment for the teacher and the learners. As you know, most of our rural areas are struggling with infrastructure, and also we have a challenge with funding in the rural areas. There was a program, I was reading that story earlier today, a program in which some rural schools were not able to get funding because they did not have transport to get to the designated spaces where the money was to be made available. This story was in the Newsday. Yes, today's Newsday. Also, we Right. Welcome back once again. This is Zimbabwe Daily. My name is Yvonne Muchaka, and we are bringing you behind the mic where we were looking at the grade 7 results. I was speaking to the president of ARTUZ, the Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, Mr. Obert Masaraure, and he raised a number of fundamental issues around the said results, the said outcome of results in the rural areas. And as we continue to bring you broadcasts on Zimbabwe Daily, we want to make sure that we're able to develop our country and contribute properly to the things that will develop the very foundations that we're trying to build. So, adequate funding, devolution, and democratization of education management, addressing curriculum deficits, promotion of labor justice, and introduction of technology in the rural areas are some of the possible solutions that will help us to see growth in our education sector. So this year, ZIMSEC says there was a 9% drop in our pass rates. Congratulations to those whose children did well and to those whose children did not do so well. May you encourage those little souls. May you encourage them and introduce other things that they can do and do so well, and really don't pressure those young souls because they're still growing at 12, 13. Really, there is still room for improvement. Just because they didn't come out very well in grade 7 doesn't mean they'll not amount to anything. So let us encourage our children and let us encourage those little souls to bud. Those who did well, congratulations. May you continue on that journey. Those who didn't do so well, kudos to you. You are the ones that we hope to see in future. There are so many people who didn't do so well in school, but they're doing so well in life. So don't judge yourself based on the grade 7 result slip. So thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Have yourselves a pleasant rest of day. God bless you.